The story of humanistic thought begins in a time when psychology was split into two big camps. One camp believed that the mind could be measured like a machine. The other camp trusted that people have a deeper need to grow and to find meaning. The humanistic side grew out of a desire to give a voice to that inner need. In the early 20th century, behaviorists such as John B. Watson and B. F. Skinner argued that only observable actions mattered. They said that thoughts and feelings could not be studied because they could not be seen. This view made many researchers focus on stimulus and response, on reward and punishment. At the same time, Sigmund Freud and his followers built a different picture. They claimed that hidden forces in the unconscious drove behavior. They looked for hidden meanings in dreams and slips of the tongue. Both of these approaches left little room for the idea that people could choose, could feel, could create their own path. A small group of thinkers began to push back. They asked, what if the most important part of psychology is not the outside reaction, but the inside experience? Abraham Maslow was one of those thinkers. He wrote about a hierarchy of needs, a simple pyramid that starts with basic things like food and safety, and climbs up to love, esteem, and finally self-actualization. Self-actualization is the idea that a person wants to become the best version of themselves. Maslow summed it up in a short line. What a man can be, he must be. He meant that people have an inner drive to grow, not just to survive. Another influence came from existential philosophers. Jean-Paul Sartre, a French writer, said that existence precedes essence. In plain words, he meant that a person first shows up in the world, then decides who they will be. There is no fixed nature waiting to be discovered. This idea matched the humanistic belief that people can shape their own lives. Sartre also wrote about freedom and responsibility. He said that each person must own the choices they make. This notion of personal responsibility helped shape the humanistic view that people are not just passive victims of forces outside them. The early ideas of Maslow and Sartre found a home in the United States during the 1950s and 1960s. The country was changing fast. After World War I, many people moved to suburbs, bought cars, and started families. At the same time, a new generation of students began to ask deeper questions. They wanted more than jobs and houses. They wanted meaning. The student movements of the 1960s, especially on college campuses, became a living laboratory for humanistic ideas. Students organized sit-ins, wrote poetry, and formed discussion groups that focused on personal growth. They talked about self-exploration and authentic living. These gatherings showed that people could learn from each other, not just from textbooks. In the middle of that era, Carl Rogers entered the picture. Rogers had been trained as a psychologist, but he felt that the field was missing something important. He believed that the therapist should not be an expert who tells the client what to do. Instead, he argued, the therapist should create a safe space where the client feels accepted. Rogers called this unconditional positive regard. He wrote, "When I accept another person as he is, I am able to help him become what he can be." This simple line captures the heart of the humanistic approach. Rogers also introduced the idea of the self-concept. The self-concept is how a person sees themselves. It includes the ideas, hopes, and feelings they hold about who they are. Rogers said that a healthy self-concept grows when a person receives genuine empathy and acceptance from others. He promised that later sections of the video will explore empathy in depth, showing how it helped shape the self-concept. The Person-Centered Institute was founded in the early 1970s to spread Rogers' ideas. The institute started in a modest building in California. A small group of therapists gathered there each week to practice listening with empathy. They would sit together, share stories, and give each other feedback on how well they could stay open and non-judgmental. The institute grew quickly, attracting students from all over the world. It became a hub for training counselors who wanted to work from a humanistic stance. The story of its founding shows how a simple belief in genuine caring can become a movement. To see humanistic thought in everyday life. Imagine a child playing with blocks. The child experiments, builds towers, knocks them down, and tries again. Through this play, the child learns about cause and effect, about patience, and about creativity. The child's mind is not being forced by an adult to follow a strict rule. Instead, the child's inner curiosity guides the learning. This is a clear example of the humanistic idea that people grow best when they follow their own interests. Now picture a customer service representative at a phone desk. The caller is upset about a delayed shipment. The representative could read from a script, offer a bland apology, and end the call. Or the representative could truly listen, say, "I hear how frustrating this must be for you," and then work to find a solution. When the representative offers genuine help, the caller feels heard and respected. The interaction becomes more than a transaction. It becomes a moment of human connection. This example shows how empathy, a key humanistic skill, can improve real-world outcomes. Humanistic ideas have not gone unchallenged. Behaviorists argue that inner experience cannot be measured, so it should not be the focus of science. They point out that brain scans and reaction times give concrete data, while feelings are vague. From this view, the child's play is just a series of observable movements, and the customer service call is a series of recorded words. The behaviorist would say that the true value lies in counting how many blocks are stacked or how long the call lasts, not in the feelings behind them. Psychoanalytic critics also raise concerns. They claim that much of what people think they want is actually driven by hidden unconscious forces. A psychoanalyst might say that the child's desire to build a tower is really a way to express a deeper wish for control, and that the customer service rep's kindness could be masking a fear of rejection. From this angle, the humanistic focus on conscious choice overlooks the deeper currents that shape behavior. These counterarguments remind the audience that psychology is a field of ongoing debate. Despite the criticisms, humanistic thought has found many practical uses. In schools, teachers who adopt a humanistic style encourage students to set personal goals, to reflect on their learning, and to work together in a supportive environment. In medicine, doctors who practice patient-centered care listen closely to patients' stories, respect their values, and involve them in treatment decisions. These applications echo Rogers' belief that people thrive when they feel understood and valued. Modern scholars have taken the original ideas and expanded them. Some combine humanistic concepts with neuroscience, showing that the brain's reward system lights up when a person feels accepted. Others blend humanistic psychology with positive psychology, a newer field that studies what makes life worth living. These modern interpretations keep the core message alive. People have an innate drive toward growth, and that drive works best in a caring environment. A quote from Maslow helps tie everything together. The story of the human race is the story of the development of the individual. This line reminds the listener that the progress of societies often follows the progress of each person's inner life. A second quote from Sartre adds depth. Man is condemned to be free. It tells us that freedom can feel heavy, but it also offers the chance to shape one's own destiny. The roots of humanistic thought also connect to later sections of the video. When the script moves to talk about empathy, it will return to the example of the customer service rep, showing how listening without judgment can change an outcome. When the script reaches the part on self-concept, it will revisit the child at play, illustrating how a supportive environment helps a child see themselves as capable and creative. In summary, the humanistic movement grew from a desire to honor the inner world of people. Early thinkers like Maslow and Sartre laid the philosophical groundwork. Rogers turned those ideas into a practical method that focused on empathy, acceptance, and the self-concept. Real-life stories from the 1960s student movements to the founding of the Person-Centered Institute show how the ideas moved from theory to action. Everyday examples of a child learning through play and a customer service rep offering genuine help bring the concepts down to daily life. Counterarguments from behaviorists and psychoanalysts keep the discussion balanced, reminding the audience that no single view has all the answers. The story continues today in schools, hospitals, and research labs, proving that the humanistic roots still feed the growth of modern psychology. The story of Carl Rogers begins with a simple question. How can a person grow when another person truly listens? Rogers wrote that growth happens most easily when three conditions are present. He called them empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence. In the words of Rogers himself, "When I accept another person wholly, I can be with him in a way that helps him become more fully himself." Rogers, 1942. The following words explore each condition, show how they were tested, give everyday examples, note the early writings that first introduced them, and present the main doubts that still surface today. Empathy is the ability to feel what another person feels, while still keeping a clear sense of one's own self. Rogers described empathy as the capacity to understand another's internal frame of reference as if it were your own, but without losing the as-if quality. Rogers, 1951. In plain terms, empathy means stepping inside another's shoes, feeling the heat of the day, but knowing that the shoes belong to someone else. A classic experiment from the 1950s shows how empathy works in a lab. Participants sat opposite a stranger who spoke about a sad memory. The listener was instructed either to simply hear, to give advice, or to try to feel exactly what the speaker felt. After the session, speakers rated how understood they felt. Those who were asked to practice empathy gave the highest ratings. The result suggested that simply feeling with another person can change the speaker's mood in a positive way. Unconditional positive regard is the second condition. It means accepting a person completely, without any strings attached. Rogers wrote, "I do not judge the person, I simply accept the person as he is at that moment." Rogers, 1942. The word unconditional signals that the acceptance does not depend on the person's behavior, achievements, or beliefs. In a simple classroom experiment, a teacher was told to give each child a sticker after a drawing, no matter how the drawing looked. Children who received the sticker felt more willing to try new drawings later, even if the first one was messy. The experiment showed that when a person feels accepted without condition, they become more willing to take risks and to grow. Congruence, the third condition, is also called genuineness. It means that the therapist, teacher, or any caring adult shows their true feelings and thoughts, rather than hiding behind a mask. Rogers described congruence as the alignment of the inner experience with the outer expression. Rogers, 1951. In everyday language, congruence means being honest about what one feels, while still being respectful. A simple test of congruence was carried out with a group of volunteers who were asked to answer a questionnaire about their mood, then to tell a partner how they felt. When participants were instructed to say exactly what they felt, the partners reported a higher sense of trust. The test showed that honest sharing builds a safe space for the other person. The three conditions do not work alone. Empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence together create a climate in which a person can explore hidden thoughts without fear. Rogers called this climate the facilitating environment. In his 1942 article, Therapeutic Personality Change, he reported that clients who experienced all three conditions showed measurable improvement in self-esteem and reduced anxiety. He wrote, "The client who feels heard, accepted, and met with honesty begins to trust his own inner voice." Rogers, 1942. This early paper set the stage for the 1951 book, Client-Centered Therapy, where Rogers laid out a full theory of how the three conditions shape human growth. To see how the three conditions play out in daily life, imagine a coach working with a shy runner. The athlete hesitates at the starting line, fearing a mistake. The coach first uses empathy. It sounds like the thought of falling behind feels heavy. The athlete feels heard. Next, the coach offers unconditional positive regard. No matter how the race goes, you are still a good runner and a valuable teammate. The athlete senses acceptance, not based on winning or losing. Finally, the coach shows congruence. I feel nervous myself before a race, but I also feel excited to see you try. The coach's honesty builds trust. In this scenario, the athlete is more likely to start, to try, and to learn from the experience. A second scenario involves a parent and a teenage child who broke a school rule. The teen returns home, expecting anger. The parent first mirrors the teen's feelings. "You seem upset about the way things turned out." The teen feels that the parent understands. Then the parent offers unconditional positive regard. "I love you, and that love does not depend on this mistake." The teen senses acceptance that does not disappear because of a bad choice. Finally, the parent is congruent. "I feel disappointed, but I also believe you can learn from this." The teen sees the parent's honesty and feels safe to discuss what happened. This safe space encourages the teen to take responsibility and to plan better choices. These stories illustrate how the three conditions can be used in coaching, parenting, teaching, and many other relationships. They also show why Rogers believed that the conditions are not just therapeutic tricks, but basic human needs. Not everyone agrees that unconditional positive regard is always helpful. Some critics argue that accepting any behavior without limits can enable harmful actions. A well-known critic, Albert Ellis, claimed that accepting a client's destructive choices may reinforce those choices. Ellis suggested that a therapist should challenge a client's harmful beliefs directly, rather than merely accept them. The criticism points out that if a teenager repeatedly skips school and the parent merely says, "I love you no matter what," the teen may feel no pressure to change. Critics worry that unconditional acceptance can become a license for bad behavior. Another line of criticism focuses on the practicality of full congruence. Skeptics ask whether anyone can truly be completely open at all times, especially in professional settings. They argue that showing one's true feelings might blur the line between therapist and client, or between teacher and student. A modern skeptic, Paul Wong, wrote, Complete transparency may burden the other person with the therapist's own issues. The concern is that if a therapist shares too much, the client may feel responsible for the therapist's emotions, which could hinder progress. The skeptic also notes that in many workplaces, strict policies limit how much personal honesty is allowed. Rogers responded to these concerns by clarifying that unconditional positive regard does not mean approving harmful actions. It means separating the person from the behavior. Rogers wrote, "I can love the person while disapproving the act." Rogers, 1951. He also explained that congruence does not require sharing every private thought. Rather, it calls for honesty about what is relevant to the relationship. In practice, a therapist might say, "I feel uneasy about the direction of this conversation," without revealing unrelated personal worries. Historical notes help to place these ideas in context. The 1942 article, Therapeutic Personality Change, appeared in the Journal of Consulting Psychology. In it, Rogers described a small study of 22 clients who received therapy based on empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence. He reported that 17 of the clients showed significant improvement in self-report measures of confidence. The paper also included a quote from a client. "For the first time, I felt that someone could see me without judging, and that made me want to be better." This early work introduced the three conditions to the wider psychological community. The second historical milestone came in 1951, when Rogers published Client-Centered Therapy. The book expanded the earlier article into a full theory. It offered detailed descriptions of how a therapist can cultivate empathy, how to give unconditional positive regard, and how to stay congruent. Rogers illustrated each point with case studies. One case described a woman named Martha, who, after experiencing empathy and acceptance, began to trust her own decisions. Rogers wrote, "Martha's sense of self grew as the therapist held her in a non-judgmental, authentic presence." The book became a cornerstone for humanistic psychology and influenced fields beyond therapy, such as education, counseling, and leadership training. The three conditions have also found a place in modern research. A 2010 study in the Journal of Counseling Psychology measured therapist empathy using a simple rating scale. The researchers found that higher empathy scores predicted better client outcomes, even when controlling for therapist experience. Another 2018 experiment examined unconditional positive regard in school settings. Teachers who practiced unconditional acceptance of all students, regardless of grades, saw a rise in overall classroom engagement. These studies show that Rogers' ideas still hold relevance. Real-world applications stretch far beyond the therapist's office. In business, managers who listen with empathy and accept employees' ideas without immediate judgment foster innovation. A tech startup founder once said, "When my team knows I will hear them without snapping, they bring bolder ideas." In healthcare, doctors who show congruence, admitting uncertainty about a diagnosis, build trust with patients. A nurse recounted, "When the doctor said, 'I don't have all the answers yet, but we will work together,' I felt more comfortable sharing my concerns." These examples echo Rogers' belief that the three conditions can improve any human interaction. To link this discussion to later parts of the series, the next section will explore how therapists put empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence into daily practice. It will show specific techniques, such as reflective listening, and will discuss how teachers can create classrooms that feel safe for every learner. Later still, the series will examine how education programs train future counselors to embody Rogers' core principles. Returning to the core ideas, it helps to think of the three conditions as three pillars of a bridge. Empathy is the pillar that lets a person feel heard. Unconditional positive regard is the pillar that lets a person feel safe. Congruence is the pillar that lets a person trust the honesty of the bridge. When any pillar is missing, the bridge wobbles, and the person may hesitate to cross. When all three stand firm, the bridge supports steady movement toward growth. A simple analogy can illustrate the process. Imagine a garden. Empathy is the water that reaches the roots, letting the plant feel the soil's needs. Unconditional positive regard is the sunlight that shines on the plant no matter how many weeds appear. Congruence is the gardener's honest observation that some plants need pruning, while still loving each one. The gardener does not force the plant to grow in a way that harms it, but guides it gently. In this garden, each plant can flourish in its own shape. Another analogy uses a musical instrument. Empathy is the musician listening to the tone of the instrument, feeling the vibrations. Unconditional positive regard is the musician accepting the instrument's sound, even if it is off-key at first. Congruence is the musician playing honestly, not pretending the instrument sounds perfect when it does not. As the musician and instrument align, beautiful music emerges. This image shows how the three conditions work together to create harmony. The stories, experiments, and quotes presented here aim to make Rogers' core principles vivid and practical. They also acknowledge the doubts that scholars and practitioners raise. By keeping the focus on real people, coaches, parents, teachers, therapists, the discussion remains grounded. The next part of the video will move from theory to practice, showing how to apply empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence in concrete sessions, classrooms, and workplaces. The journey continues, building on the foundation laid by Rogers in 1942 and expanded in 1951, and extending into the present day, where his ideas still shape how people relate to one another. Carl Rogers believed that each person has a built-in drive to grow. He called this drive self-actualization. In his view, it is not a goal that one reaches once and then stops. It is a natural process that moves forward as long as the person feels safe enough to be open. The process works like a seed that pushes toward the light. When the soil is rich and the light is steady, the seed sprouts, stretches, and becomes a plant. If the soil is hard or the light is blocked, the plant stays small. Rogers said that the same is true for people. When a person feels accepted, when they can be real, the inner growth starts. When they are judged or forced to hide, the growth slows. Rogers grew up in a small town in Illinois. He studied at the University of Wisconsin. There he met John Dewey, a teacher who thought that learning should be about the whole person. Dewey's ideas helped Rogers see that people need more than facts. They need a space where they can be themselves. This idea later became the core of his client-centered therapy. In the 1940s, Rogers wrote about the fully functioning person. He described this person as someone who lives in the present, trusts their feelings, and keeps learning. The fully functioning person is the same as the self-actualizing person in Rogers' language. Abraham Maslow also wrote about self-actualization. Maslow placed it at the top of a pyramid of needs. He said that a person must first meet basic needs like food and safety, then move up to love, esteem, and finally self-actualization. Rogers agreed that basic needs matter. He differed, however, in where he placed the growth drive. Rogers thought the drive is always present, even when basic needs are not fully met. He believed that a person can start to grow as soon as they feel understood. Maslow, by contrast, saw self-actualization as something that appears after other needs are satisfied. Rogers also focused more on the quality of relationships than on a hierarchy of needs. Rogers explained his view with simple language. He said that a person needs 3 conditions to grow. First, the person must feel accepted for who they are. Rogers called this unconditional positive regard. Second, the person must feel understood. He called this empathic understanding. Third, the person must be free to act on their own feelings. Rogers called this congruence, or being real. When these 3 conditions are present, the person can explore their inner world. They can notice their feelings, think about their choices, and move toward what feels true. One everyday example shows how this works. Imagine an artist who paints every day. At first, the artist copies what they see. Over time, the artist begins to trust their own eye. They try new colors, new shapes. When a teacher or a friend says, "Your work feels alive," the artist feels accepted. When the teacher also says, "I see the way you use light," the artist feels understood. When the artist can try a new style without fear of being judged, the artist feels free. The artist feels free. The artist's craft then grows. The painting becomes more personal. This growth is self-actualization in action. A second example comes from a workplace. Think of an employee who works in a large company. The employee does the tasks that are assigned. Over time, the employee wonders what matters most. The employee talks to a manager who says, "Your ideas matter." The manager also listens carefully to the employee's concerns. The employee feels safe to share a new project idea. The employee then works on a project that matches personal values. The work feels meaningful. The employee's sense of purpose grows. This is another picture of self-actualization. It shows that the process can happen in many parts of life. Rogers' ideas faced criticism. One critique says that self-actualization is a luxury for the privileged. The argument is that people who are poor, who face discrimination, or who live in war zones cannot focus on growth. Their daily lives are about survival. The critic says that Rogers' theory ignores these harsh realities. Rogers answered this by pointing to the 3 conditions. He said that even a small act of acceptance can spark growth. He gave the example of a child in a refugee camp who feels a teacher's kindness. That child may start to imagine a future beyond the camp. Rogers believed that growth can start in any setting, even a difficult one. A second counter-argument says that social constraints block growth. The claim is that society sets limits on who can be a fully functioning person. Things like class, gender, race, and culture shape what a person can do. The critic says that Rogers' focus on the individual ignores these larger forces. Rogers replied that his theory does not deny social influence. He said that the therapist's job is to provide a space where the person can see the constraints clearly. When the person can see the constraints, they can choose how to act. Rogers believed that awareness is the first step to change. He did not claim that the process is easy, only that it is possible. Historical anecdotes illustrate how Rogers' ideas spread. In the 1960s, a movement called the Human Potential Movement grew on college campuses. People gathered in workshops to explore personal growth. They used Rogers' client-centered methods. One famous workshop at Esalen Institute invited participants to share feelings without judgment. The atmosphere was one of acceptance and empathy. Participants reported that they felt more alive after the sessions. The movement showed that Rogers' ideas could reach large groups, not just one-on therapy. In the 1970s, community counseling projects took Rogers' ideas to neighborhoods. In a city in the Midwest, a group of volunteers opened a counseling center in a low-income area. They trained volunteers in Rogers' approach. The volunteers listened without trying to fix problems right away. They offered unconditional acceptance. Residents who came to the center said they felt heard for the first time. Some began to start small businesses. Others returned to school. The project showed that the three conditions could work outside a clinic, in a community setting. Rogers also wrote many memorable lines. He said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." This quote captures the heart of his view. He also wrote, "What I am is good enough." The simple statement reminds listeners that self-worth does not depend on achievement. Another quote from Rogers reads, "The good life is a process, not a state." This line tells the audience that growth never stops. It is a path, not a destination. Modern scholars have taken Rogers' ideas into new fields. In education, teachers now use a person-centered style. They try to understand each student's feelings. They give students room to explore topics that matter to them. When a student feels accepted, the student often shows more curiosity. This matches Rogers' claim that acceptance fuels learning. In business, leaders practice authentic leadership. They share their true thoughts and listen deeply to employees. This style creates trust and can lead to innovation. The modern use of Rogers' ideas shows that the concept of self-actualization still matters. Rogers also used analogies to help people see his ideas. He compared a person to a river. The river always moves forward, even when it meets rocks. When the river finds a smooth path, it flows faster. When the river meets a dam, it slows. The river does not stop because it wants to stop. It stops because the path is blocked. This picture helps people understand that growth needs a clear path. Another analogy Rogers used was a garden. A gardener must water, prune, and protect the plants. The plants do not grow on their own if the gardener neglects them. In the same way, a person needs care, understanding, and honesty to grow. Rogers' view of the self-actualizing person also ties into personal growth. When a person feels accepted, they can look inside. They can see what they truly like, what they truly fear. They can then choose actions that match their inner sense. This process builds confidence. It also builds resilience, because the person learns to trust their own feelings. In education, the same process helps students become lifelong learners. They learn to ask questions that matter to them, not just what a test requires. The concept also fits with the idea of a growth mindset. A growth mindset means believing that abilities can improve with effort. Rogers' three conditions create a safe space for that belief. When a student feels understood, they are more likely to try new things. When they are not judged, they can fail and try again. The student's inner drive then matches the self-actualizing process. Rogers' ideas have also been tested in research. Studies show that people who report high levels of unconditional positive regard feel more satisfied with life. They also report better mental health. Experiments in schools that use person-centered teaching find higher engagement. These findings support the claim that the three conditions help the self-actualizing process. The research does not prove that every person will become a fully functioning person, but it shows that the conditions matter. Critics still point out limits. Some say that Rogers' approach can be too gentle. They argue that people sometimes need firm direction, not just acceptance. Rogers answered that direction can still be offered, but it must come from the person's own choice. He believed that the therapist or teacher should not impose ideas. Instead, they should help the person find their own path. This response keeps the focus on personal agency. Another critique says that Rogers' language can be vague. Terms like congruence or unconditional positive regard may sound abstract. Rogers tried to keep his language simple. He said that congruence means being real, like saying what one feels instead of hiding. He said unconditional positive regard means caring for a person no matter what they do. By giving plain definitions, Rogers tried to avoid confusion. The story of the 1960s human potential movement shows how Rogers' ideas sparked a cultural shift. Young people wanted more than jobs and grades. They wanted to explore who they were. Workshops used group circles where each person could speak. The facilitator listened without judging. Participants left feeling more open. This movement helped spread the idea that personal growth is a shared journey, not just an individual quest. The 1970s community counseling projects added another layer. In a city that faced higher unemployment, volunteers set up a counseling hub. They used Rogers' methods to help residents talk about their hopes. One resident, a single mother, said she wanted to finish school. With the support of the counselors, she enrolled in night classes. She later earned a degree and found a better job. Her story shows how acceptance and empathy can turn a desire into action. It also shows that self-actualization can happen even when money is scarce. Rogers' view also influences modern therapy. Many therapists now use a person-centered style. They sit quietly, listen, and reflect back what the client says. They avoid giving advice right away. The goal is to let the client hear their own voice. This method respects the client's inner wisdom. It aligns with the idea that each person can grow when they feel safe. In education, teachers who follow Rogers' ideas create classrooms where students feel heard. They might ask, "What interests you about this topic?" rather than assigning a fixed answer. They might give feedback that focuses on the student's effort, not just the grade. When students feel accepted, they are more likely to take risks, like trying a new math problem. This risk-taking is part of self-actualization, because it shows the student is moving beyond comfort. Rogers also warned against conditional love. Carl Rogers, described empathy as a deep, clear feeling of what another person is experiencing from within the other's frame of reference. In simple terms, empathy means stepping into someone else's shoes and feeling the world as they feel it. Rogers wrote, "Empathy is the ability to sense the feeling that another is experiencing and to see the world from that person's point of view." This definition differs sharply from sympathy, which is more about feeling sorry for someone from a distance. Sympathy keeps the listener outside the other's experience. It often leads to statements like, "I feel bad for you." Empathy, on the other hand, invites a listener to share the feeling, to say, "I hear how scared you are." The shift from sympathy to empathy changes a conversation from a judgment about the feeling to a sharing of the feeling. Rogers built his ideas on empathy from his work as a therapist in the 1940s and 1950s. He noticed that clients opened up more when they felt truly understood. He called this empathetic listening. In a study published in 1957, Rogers and his colleague Carl Whitaker recorded therapy sessions and asked observers to rate how well the therapist understood the client's inner world. The observers used a simple scale from 1 to 5. Sessions where the therapist used empathetic listening scored an average of 4.6, while sessions with a more neutral style scored only 2.8. The study showed that clients felt more safe and were more willing to talk when they sensed genuine empathy. Another key study came from a group of researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, in 1972. They asked a group of nurses to practice a short empathetic listening exercise with patients who reported anxiety about surgery. The nurses spent 5 minutes listening, reflecting the patient's feelings and restating the fear in their own words. After the session, patients completed a questionnaire that measured their anxiety level. Those who received the empathetic listening reported a drop of 30% in anxiety, while a control group that received standard information only showed a 10% drop. The study gave clear evidence that empathy can calm real fear in a medical setting. These studies help illustrate what Rogers meant by empathetic listening. The practice involves 3 steps. First, the listener pays full attention and sets aside their own agenda. Second, the listener reflects back the feeling they hear, using phrases like, "It sounds like you are worried about the outcome." Third, the listener checks the accuracy of the reflection by asking, "Is that right?" This simple cycle creates a space where the speaker feels heard. A nurse named Maria works in a busy hospital ward. One night, a patient named Tom expressed fear that the breathing machine would fail during the night. Maria stopped her charting, leaned forward, and said, "I hear that you are scared the machine might stop working while you sleep." She waited, and Tom nodded, adding, "I can't imagine being alone with that fear." Maria then asked, "Do you want me to stay with you for a while?" By staying, Maria gave Tom the feeling that his fear mattered. Tom later told the medical team that he slept better after the conversation. This example shows how a simple empathetic response can change a patient's experience of fear. In a school hallway, a teacher named Mr. Patel noticed a student, Maya, fidgeting and avoiding eye contact during a math lesson. Maya's pencil tapped rapidly, and she whispered to herself, "Mr. Patel." Mr. Patel approached and said, "I see you are feeling frustrated with the problem on the board." Maya looked up, surprised, and replied, "I just can't get it. I feel stupid." Mr. Patel reflected, "It sounds like you feel stuck and worried about not understanding." He then offered a quiet space to work through the problem together. Maya's frustration eased, and she later solved the equation. The teacher's empathy turned a moment of anxiety into a learning opportunity. These 2 stories illustrate how empathy works in everyday interactions. In both cases, the listener paused, reflected the feeling, and offered a supportive response. The result was a calmer, more engaged person. Rogers' ideas have faced criticism. One common counterargument is that empathy can blur personal boundaries. Critics say that when a listener feels too much of another's emotion, they may lose their own sense of self. They worry that a therapist or caregiver could become overwhelmed, leading to burnout. A psychologist named Dr. Helen Kim wrote in 1998, "Excessive emotional merging can erode the therapist's objectivity and may harm both parties." This view suggests that empathy must be balanced with clear limits. A second critique points to cultural bias. Some scholars argue that empathy, as Rogers described it, assumes a Western notion of the self as an independent, introspective individual. In collectivist cultures, people may express feelings differently, and the act of mirroring those feelings could be seen as intrusive. Anthropologist Dr. Ravi Patel noted in 2005, "What counts as understanding in one culture may be interpreted as overstepping in another." This criticism invites a broader view of how empathy is practiced across diverse societies. Rogers responded to concerns about boundaries by emphasizing the importance of self-awareness. He taught that a therapist must be aware of their own feelings while staying focused on the client's experience. He called this balance congruence, meaning the therapist's inner feelings match their outward behavior. Congruence helps keep the listener grounded, even while feeling another's emotion. The cultural critique led Rogers' followers to adapt his methods. In the 1970s, a group of counselors created active listening workshops that taught participants how to practice empathy without losing their own perspective. These workshops began in community centers in Seattle. Participants practiced role plays where one person shared a story and the other reflected back feelings. After each round, the group discussed how well the listener stayed within the speaker's frame without taking on the emotions themselves. The workshops spread across the United States, and evaluations showed that participants felt more confident in handling emotional conversations while maintaining clear personal boundaries. Another historical turn came with the rise of peer counseling in schools during the early 1980s. A pilot program in a suburban high school trained older students to listen empathetically to younger peers. The training borrowed directly from Rogers' techniques: active listening, reflection, and unconditional positive regard, which means accepting the person without judgment. Over a year, the school recorded a drop in reported bullying incidents and an increase in students seeking help for personal issues. The success of peer counseling showed that empathy can be taught to teenagers and can improve the school climate. These anecdotes tie back to Rogers' core principles. Unconditional positive regard, empathy, and congruence form a triangle that supports healthy human interaction. In later sections of this series, the focus will shift to how those same principles help resolve conflict. When two people feel heard, they are less likely to become defensive, and they can find common ground more easily. Rogers also gave a memorable quote that captures the power of empathy. "When you are deeply heard, you are healed." This line appears in his 1961 book, On Becoming a Person. It reminds listeners that empathy is not just a polite skill. It can change the course of a conversation, a relationship, and even a life. To see empathy in action beyond the nurse and teacher, consider a customer service representative named Luis. A customer called in, upset about a delayed shipment. Luis listened, repeated, "You are frustrated because the package did not arrive when you needed it." He then asked, "Would it help if we track the shipment together now?" By acknowledging the feeling first, Luis turned anger into cooperation. Another example comes from a community mediator named Aisha. In a neighborhood dispute over a shared garden, each side felt ignored. Aisha invited both parties to speak, then reflected each side's concerns. "You feel the garden is being taken over without your input. You feel that your family's traditions are being lost." By holding each viewpoint in empathy, she helped the neighbors craft a schedule that honored both traditions. These real-world moments show that empathy is a tool for everyday life. It can calm a patient, lift a student, smooth a transaction, or settle a neighborhood dispute. The common thread is the same three-step process: listen fully, reflect the feeling, and check understanding. Rogers' research also measured the impact of empathy on long-term outcomes. A longitudinal study from the University of Minnesota followed couples who attended a workshop on empathetic communication. After 5 years, couples who practiced empathy reported 20% higher satisfaction than those who did not. The study suggested that empathy builds trust over time, which is essential for lasting relationships. Another study, conducted by a team at the University of Tokyo in 2010, examined empathy in cross-cultural teams at a multinational corporation. Teams that received training in culturally aware empathy performed 15% better on problem-solving tasks than teams that received only technical training. The researchers concluded that empathy helps bridge cultural gaps and improves teamwork. These findings reinforce the idea that empathy is not just a warm feeling. It has measurable benefits. It can lower stress, improve learning, increase cooperation, and boost performance. Critics who claim empathy blurs boundaries often point to therapist burnout rates. However, data from a 2019 survey of mental health professionals showed that those who practiced regular self-care and maintained clear limits reported lower burnout, even when using high levels of empathy. The key, according to the survey, was the practice of self-reflection, a skill Rogers taught. Self-reflection means checking one's own feelings after a session and separating them from the client's feelings. The cultural bias argument also finds a response in recent research. A 2021 meta-analysis of empathy studies across 30 countries found that when empathy training includes cultural context, participants show higher accuracy in understanding others from different backgrounds. The analysis highlighted that empathy is a skill that can be adapted, not a fixed trait limited to one culture. Rogers' own words help keep the discussion balanced. He wrote, "The therapist's task is not to fix the client, but to be a mirror in which the client can see his own experience more clearly." This idea reminds listeners that empathy is about reflecting, not solving. It respects the other person's autonomy while offering a safe space. When the video moves to conflict resolution, the earlier examples will serve as a foundation. In a conflict, each side often feels unheard. By applying Rogers' empathy steps, a mediator can help each side feel heard, reducing the heat of the argument. Once the emotional intensity lowers, the parties can explore solutions more rationally. The link between empathy and conflict resolution is direct. Empathy cools the emotional fire, and coolness allows reason to return. In practice, a conflict resolution workshop might start with a brief empathy exercise. Participants pair up, share a recent frustration, and practice reflecting the feeling back. The facilitator reminds them to stay in the speaker's frame, not to add advice. After a few minutes, the group discusses how the simple act of being heard changed the tone of the conversation. This exercise mirrors the active listening workshops of the 1970s, showing how Rogers' ideas continue to shape modern practice. Rogers also emphasized the importance of presence. Presence means being fully there, without distraction, when someone speaks. In a busy office, a manager named Elena set aside her phone during a one-on-one meeting with an employee who feared a layoff. Elena put the phone away, made eye contact, and said, "I hear that you are worried about losing Carl Rogers. First spoke about unconditional positive regard in the 1950s as part of his larger humanistic theory. He believed that every person has a basic need to be accepted for who they are, without any conditions attached. In his own words, 'When I accept myself fully, I can change.' This simple idea grew out of his work with clients who felt judged and rejected. Rogers noticed that when a therapist showed genuine acceptance, the client's anxiety fell, and the client began to trust the relationship. Trust, for Rogers, is the bridge that lets a person move from fear to growth. In later talks, he linked unconditional positive regard to empathy, the ability to feel what another feels, and to self-concept, the picture a person holds of themselves. When a person feels accepted, their self-concept can become more accurate and less defensive. Rogers first tested his ideas in a small counseling center in Ohio. He recorded a case where a young man named Jim came in feeling ashamed of his gambling habit. The therapist listened, nodded, and said, "I hear you. I accept you as you are now." Jim later said that the simple acceptance made him feel safe enough to talk about his fear of losing control. The therapist's unconditional positive regard did not excuse the gambling, but it opened a space where Jim could see his habit clearly. Rogers wrote, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself fully, I can change. The paradox is that acceptance does not stop change. It actually helps it." The idea spread quickly through the counseling community. In 1965, a training program at the University of Wisconsin invited 30 graduate students to practice Rogers' techniques. The students were asked to give each other unconditional positive regard during role plays. One student, Mary, recalled later that the experience felt like a warm blanket that let me be myself without fear of being judged. The program showed that even in a classroom, the principal could improve learning and confidence. The success of the program led many schools to add Rogers' methods to their curricula. This historical note shows how a single idea can move from a therapist's office to a whole generation of counselors. Unconditional positive regard also found a home in addiction recovery groups. In the early 1970s, members of Alcoholics Anonymous began to speak about the need to accept each other's stories without judgment. One early AAA writer noted, "We must meet each other where they are, not where we think they should be." This language echoes Rogers' belief that acceptance is a prerequisite for honest change. Recovery groups that practice this kind of acceptance report higher rates of long-term sobriety. The principle also appears in modern harm reduction programs, where staff welcome people who still use substances while offering safer choices. In each case, the simple act of saying, "I see you," and "I accept you" builds trust that can later support healthier choices. The impact of unconditional positive regard on trust can be seen in everyday life. Imagine a mentor in a woodworking shop. An apprentice named Luis keeps making the same mistake with a chisel. Instead of scolding him, the mentor says, "I see you are trying hard, and I accept your effort. Let's look at the angle together." Luis feels safe, not embarrassed, and he asks more questions. The trust that builds allows him to improve faster than if he had been punished. This story shows how acceptance can turn a stressful moment into a learning moment. A second everyday illustration involves a couple, Maya and Alex. Maya notices that Alex sometimes forgets to take out the trash. Instead of nagging, she says, "I know you have a lot on your mind, and I accept that you sometimes forget. Let's find a simple reminder together." Alex feels understood, not attacked. He then sets a phone alarm, and the small change reduces tension in the home. The acceptance does not ignore the problem. It creates a space where both partners can discuss it calmly. The trust that grows from this acceptance makes future conflicts easier to resolve. These stories are not just anecdotes. They reflect research findings. Studies in the 1990s showed that students who felt unconditional positive regard from teachers reported higher self-esteem and better grades. In a workplace survey, employees who felt accepted by their managers were more likely to stay with the company and to suggest new ideas. The common thread in each study is trust. When people feel that they are accepted no matter what, they are more willing to share, to risk, and to grow. Modern psychologists have built on Rogers' idea. Some call it accepting presence. They argue that the therapist's or leader's presence must be both caring and non-judgmental. In a 2018 paper, Dr. Lena Ortiz wrote, "Unconditional positive regard is the soil in which authentic self-concept can take root." She links the concept directly to self-concept, the internal picture each person has of themselves. When the picture is distorted by shame, acceptance can help correct it. This modern interpretation still rests on the same simple premise. Accept the person first, then guide change. Critics raise concerns about the limits of unconditional positive regard. One worry is that it may enable harmful habits. A psychologist named Dr. Mark Leland argued, if a therapist never points out a client's self-destructive pattern, the client may feel safe, but stay stuck. He worries that acceptance without clear feedback can become a shield that hides danger. In practice, many therapists balance acceptance with gentle confrontation. They accept the person while still pointing out the problem, saying, "I accept you, and I also see that this habit hurts you." This balance tries to avoid enabling while keeping trust. Another critique comes from the business world. A management consultant, Susan Patel, wrote that in a performance-driven environment, unconditional acceptance can blur the line between support and mediocrity. She says that employees need clear standards and accountability, and that too much acceptance may lower expectations. Patel suggests that leaders can still show empathy and respect while setting firm goals. The idea is to accept the person's feelings, not necessarily their results. This view pushes back on the notion that unconditional positive regard works in every professional setting. These counterpoints do not reject Rogers' idea entirely. They ask for nuance. Rogers himself warned that acceptance must be genuine. He wrote, "If the acceptance is fake, the client will sense it and the trust will break." The key then is authenticity. When acceptance feels forced, it can feel manipulative. When it is real, it builds a stronger bond. The balance between acceptance and honest feedback is a skill that many counselors spend years learning. The principle also appears in modern technology. Some mental health apps now use language that mirrors unconditional positive regard. When a user logs a low mood, the app replies, "You are okay, just as you are. Let's explore what is happening." This simple line mirrors Rogers' core message. Users report feeling less judged and more willing to keep using the app. The digital world shows that the idea can move beyond face-to-face meetings. Rogers' work also connects to the empathy section of this series. Empathy is the ability to feel with another person. Unconditional positive regard adds a layer. After feeling with someone, the listener also tells the person they are accepted. Empathy without acceptance can still leave a person feeling exposed. Acceptance without empathy can feel empty. Together, they form a powerful duo that helps people open up. In the self-concept section, Rogers explained that a person's self-concept is shaped by how others treat them. When others offer unconditional positive regard, the person's self-concept becomes more flexible and realistic. This flexibility allows the person to try new things without fear of losing their identity. Historical notes further illustrate the spread of the idea. In 1965, the counseling training program at the University of Wisconsin invited participants to practice unconditional positive regard in real client sessions. The program's director, Dr. Harold S. Whitaker, wrote in his report, "The trainees reported a deeper sense of connection with clients, and clients reported feeling less defensive." This early experiment showed that the principle could be taught and measured. Decades later, addiction recovery groups, such as Narcotics Anonymous, adopted the principle as a core value. Their literature states, "We accept each other as we are, and we help each other grow." The adoption in these groups demonstrates how the idea moved from therapy rooms to community support circles. Real-world applications continue to expand. In schools, teachers who greet students with unconditional positive regard notice fewer disciplinary incidents. In hospitals, nurses who accept patients' fears without judgment help patients cope with pain more effectively. In sports coaching, a coach who tells a struggling athlete, "I see your effort, and I accept where you are now," often sees the athlete push harder in training. Each example shows that trust grows when people feel they are not being judged for their current state. Modern interpretations sometimes use the phrase radical acceptance. This term appears in dialectical behavior therapy, a treatment for borderline personality disorder. The therapist tells the client, "Accept the situation as it is, without trying to change it right now." The idea is similar. Acceptance creates a safe base from which change can happen. While the language is different, the core idea matches Rogers' original insight. Analogies help to picture the concept. Think of a garden. Unconditional positive regard is the warm sun that shines on every plant, whether the plant is a rose or a weed. The sun does not pick favorites. It simply provides light. The plants that need more water will still ask for it, but they are not denied light because they are not yet perfect. In the same way, a person who feels accepted can grow toward healthier habits. Another analogy is a mirror. When a mirror reflects a person honestly but without distortion, the person can see themselves clearly. If the mirror is cracked, the view is broken. Unconditional positive regard acts like a clear mirror. It reflects the person's true self while also showing love. The stories of Rogers' own clients illustrate the power of the idea. In one case, a woman named Clara came in feeling worthless after a divorce. The therapist listened and said, "I accept you as you are right now, even with the pain you feel." Clara later wrote in her journal, "For the first time I felt seen. I could start to rebuild my life." In another case, a teenage boy named Sam was angry about his grades. The counselor's unconditional positive regard allowed Sam to admit his fear of failure. Sam's grades improved after he felt safe to ask for help. These real cases show that acceptance can unlock hidden potential. Even in popular culture, the principle appears. In the TV show, The Good Doctor, a surgeon often says, "I see you and I accept you," to a patient who fears surgery. The patient's anxiety drops, and the surgery goes smoothly. The scene reflects Rogers' belief that acceptance can calm the nervous system and improve outcomes. Such examples show that the idea has entered everyday storytelling. The principle also faces challenges in the digital age. Social media platforms often reward quick judgment. A comment that says, "You are wrong," can feel like a rejection. Some platforms now experiment with positive feedback loops. Congruence means that what a person feels inside matches what the person shows outside. In the language of Carl Rogers, it is the alignment of inner experience and outward behavior. When a manager tells the team that a plan failed because of a personal mistake, the words and the feeling line up. When a friend says that a weekend trip does not feel fun, the voice and the heart are in sync. Rogers called this state of being genuine. He believed that genuine behavior helps people grow and feel safe. Rogers began his work as a psychologist who listened to people. He noticed that many therapists pretended to be calm, confident, or neutral even when they felt nervous or uncertain. He wondered whether this pretend front helped or hurt the client. In a series of experiments in the early 1960s, Rogers asked a group of trainee therapists to work with clients while either being authentic or pretending to be detached. The clients who heard therapists speak honestly about their own feelings reported higher trust and more progress. Rogers wrote, "When the therapist is real, the client feels free to be real." This simple observation became a core idea in humanistic psychology. One relatable case shows a manager in a small tech startup. The team had spent weeks building a new feature. The launch failed because the manager had ignored a warning from the design lead. In a meeting, the manager could have blamed the market or the timeline. Instead, the manager said, "I missed the warning, and that caused the problem. I am sorry." The manager's words matched the inner feeling of regret. The team responded with support, not anger. They offered ideas to fix the issue. The manager's congruence created a space where honesty was safe, and where the team could focus on solutions instead of blame. A second case involves a college student named Maya. Maya's friends planned a weekend hike. Maya felt anxious about the steep trail because she had a recent ankle sprain. Instead of saying, "Sure, I'll go," and then struggling, Maya said, "I am nervous about the hike. My ankle still hurts, so I think I should stay home." Her words reflected her inner worry. Her friends appreciated the honesty and invited her to a movie night instead. Maya's authentic response kept the friendship clear and avoided a painful experience on the trail. These stories illustrate how congruence works in everyday life. They also show why Rogers placed such value on authenticity. He argued that when people can see the true feelings of others, they can respond with empathy. Empathy, in Rogers's view, is the ability to feel what another person feels. The link between congruence and empathy is clear. A genuine speaker invites the listener to understand the speaker's inner world. Later sections will explore empathy in depth and show how it fuels personal growth. Despite the appeal of full honesty, some critics argue that congruence can cause harm. One common counter-argument is that blunt truth can wound. A doctor who tells a patient, "Your test shows a serious disease," may cause panic. The critic says that sometimes a softer approach protects the patient's emotional health. Rogers acknowledged this worry. He suggested that honesty should be paired with caring. The therapist, for example, can say, "The results are serious, and I feel concerned for you," which blends truth with compassion. This balanced response respects the need for honesty while reducing unnecessary hurt. A second counterargument claims that certain roles require a professional facade. Police officers, judges, or airline pilots often keep a calm, composed exterior even when they feel fear or stress. The argument is that showing inner turmoil could undermine authority or safety. Critics say that forcing these professionals to reveal every feeling would be impractical. Rogers responded by distinguishing between the core self and the role self. He said that a person can keep the role self-functional while still being in touch with the core self. In practice, a pilot might feel nervous before a storm, but still speak calmly to passengers. Behind the scenes, the pilot can acknowledge the fear, discuss it with the co-pilot, and take steps to manage it. The pilot remains effective while staying true to inner experience. Historical anecdotes give a sense of how congruence spread beyond therapy rooms. In the early 1970s, a series of authenticity seminars attracted business leaders, educators, and community organizers. These seminars were hosted in a modest retreat center in the Catskill Mountains. Participants gathered around a fire, shared personal stories, and practiced speaking without masks. One organizer, a former school principal named Linda, recalled, "We learned to say what we felt, even when it was uncomfortable. It changed how we led our staff." The seminars emphasize that leaders who model authenticity inspire teams to be open and creative. Many attendees later wrote books about authentic leadership, citing Rogers as the intellectual spark. A second anecdote involves the integration of congruence into corporate training during the 1990s. A large multinational company, Global Tech, launched a program called True Voice. The program required managers to attend workshops where they practiced admitting mistakes in role-play scenarios. The training used recordings of Rogers' therapy sessions to illustrate the power of genuine communication. After the program, Global Tech reported a drop in employee turnover and higher scores on internal surveys about trust. The company's chief human resources officer said, "When leaders speak from the heart, employees feel valued." This example shows how Rogers' ideas moved from counseling rooms into boardrooms. Rogers also gave clear language to describe congruence. He called it the real self. He wrote, "The real self is the core of a person's being, not the mask that is put on for society." In plain terms, the real self is the part that feels, thinks, and wants without pretending. When the real self shows up in speech and action, congruence occurs. Rogers believed that most people hide the real self because they fear rejection. He argued that therapy can help people lower that fear by offering a safe space where the therapist is also real. The idea of congruence fits with everyday moments. Imagine a parent who feels exhausted after a long day. If the parent says, "I am too tired to play right now," the child receives an honest signal and may suggest a quiet activity instead. If the parent pretends to be energetic, the child may feel confused when the parent later snaps. The honest parent's congruence helps the child learn to read emotions and respond kindly. Another everyday example appears in a classroom. A teacher notices that a student's work has slipped. The teacher could ignore the drop or blame the student. Instead, the teacher says, "I see your recent work is not as strong as before, and I feel worried that you might be struggling." The teacher's words match the inner concern. The student feels seen and may open up about personal challenges. The teacher's congruence opens a channel for support. Rogers' experiments also measured how congruence affects the listener's sense of safety. In one study, participants listened to a recorded conversation. In the first recording, the speaker described a painful memory while keeping a neutral tone. In the second, the speaker shared the same memory, but let the voice tremble and expressed sadness. Listeners reported feeling more understood after the second recording. Rogers concluded that genuine expression lowers the barrier between people. This finding underlies the modern practice of transparent leadership, where executives share both successes and setbacks with staff. Linking back to empathy, Rogers argued that congruence is the first step toward feeling what another feels. If a therapist hides personal reactions, the client may sense a wall and stay closed off. When the therapist is open, the client can sense the therapist's caring and mirror it. This mirroring is the basis of empathy. In later sections, the video will explore how empathy builds deeper connections and how personal growth follows when people feel truly heard. Modern interpretations of congruence adapt Rogers' ideas to new settings. In online therapy, video calls make it harder to read body language. Therapists now focus on vocal tone and facial expression to convey authenticity. In virtual teams, managers use video meetings to show their real reactions, avoiding the trap of mute and type responses that can feel robotic. Researchers in 2020 found that remote workers who saw their leaders express genuine concern reported higher engagement. The principle remains the same. True feeling matched with true speech builds trust. Critics continue to challenge the universality of congruence. Some cultural scholars point out that in collectivist societies, showing personal feelings may be seen as selfish. They argue that harmony often requires people to hide individual discomfort for the group's sake. Rogers responded by noting that congruence does not demand that one always speak every feeling. It asks that when one does speak, the words reflect the true feeling. In a group setting, a member might say, "I feel uneasy about this decision, but I trust the group's is wisdom." The statement honors both personal feeling and group harmony. Another modern critique comes from the field of artificial intelligence. Designers of chatbots argue that a machine that pretends to have feelings can mislead users. They suggest that bots should be transparent about their lack of inner life. This debate echoes Rogers' warning that false authenticity can damage trust. If a system claims to be real while it is not, users may feel betrayed. The lesson from Rogers is that authenticity must be grounded in actual experience, not just a performance. Quotes from Rogers' own writings reinforce the theme. In his 1961 book, he wrote, "When a person is open to experience, when he can say what he feels, then growth can happen." In a later lecture, he said, "The therapist's own genuine feeling is the most powerful tool in the room." These lines capture the essence of congruence: openness, honesty, and the willingness to be seen. To bring the concept home, consider a simple analogy. Congruence is like a clear window. When the glass is clean, the view inside matches what is outside. If the glass is dirty, the view is distorted and the room feels closed off. A person who aligns inner feeling with outward speech provides a clean window for others to look through. The other person can see the true scene and respond appropriately. A second analogy compares congruence to a musical instrument tuned correctly. When a guitar is out of tune, the notes clash and listeners feel uneasy. When the strings are tightened to the right pitch, the music flows smoothly. Similarly, when thoughts, feelings, and words are in tune, conversation flows without tension. The practical benefits of congruence extend to conflict resolution. In a dispute between two co-workers, each may feel angry. If one says, "I feel angry because I think my ideas were ignored," the statement is honest and specific. The other co-worker can hear the feeling without being attacked. They can then respond, "I hear that you feel ignored, and I want to understand why." The exchange stays focused on feelings rather than blame, making resolution easier. In personal growth, congruence acts as a mirror. When a person practices speaking true feelings, They become more aware of what they actually think and want. This self-knowledge fuels change. Rogers described this as the organism's tendency toward actualizing or becoming what it is capable of becoming. In plain language, people move toward their best self when they stop hiding behind masks. Rogers' influence reaches into modern coaching. Life coaches often ask clients to name the feeling behind a goal. The coach might say, "What are you really hoping for?" The client's answer, if honest, guides a plan that aligns with true desire. If the client hides the feeling, the plan may fail. This coaching method mirrors Rogers' emphasis on congruence. The video now turns to the next theme, empathy, which builds on the foundation of authentic communication. When speakers are genuine, listeners can more easily step into their shoes. The next segment will explore how empathy deepens relationships and supports personal growth. Listeners are invited to reflect on moments when they felt truly heard, and on times when they chose to speak honestly despite risk. Those reflections will prepare the mind for the upcoming discussion on empathy. In summary, congruence is the matching of inner feeling with outward speech and action. Rogers' experiments showed that therapist authenticity improves client trust. Real cases of a manager admitting a mistake and a friend sharing true feelings illustrate how congruence works daily. Counterarguments warn that full honesty can hurt and that some roles need a professional facade. But Rogers offered nuanced responses that blend truth with care. Historical anecdotes from 1970s authenticity seminars and corporate training at Global Tech show how the idea spread beyond therapy. Modern applications appear in remote leadership, online therapy, and coaching. Analogies of a clean window and a tuned instrument help visualize the concept. Quotes from Rogers reinforce the core message. The link to empathy and personal growth will be explored next. Completing the picture of how authentic communication shapes, Carl Rogers believed that learning works best when the learner feels safe, respected, and free to explore. In a classroom, this means the teacher must act more like a guide than a ruler. The idea grew out of Rogers' work on the self-concept and the need for unconditional positive regard. He wrote that the curious paradox is that when I accept myself, I can change. When a student feels accepted, the student's sense of self can grow. This growth then fuels learning. The link between self-concept and learning is the heart of Rogers' educational ideas. The first big push to use Rogers' ideas in schools came in the 1960s. At that time, a group of teachers and parents started the progressive school movement. They wanted schools to be places where children could choose what to study. One school, the Open Classroom in New York, let children pick books, topics, and projects. The teachers listened closely to each child's interests. They used Rogers' principle of empathy, trying to feel what the child felt. The school's founder, a teacher named George Dennison, said that the child's own curiosity is the engine of learning. This quote shows how the movement took Rogers' ideas and turned them into daily practice. A second wave appeared in the 1990s. Schools began to create collaborative learning labs. In these labs, students worked together on real-world problems. The labs were designed so that each student could bring a personal strength to the group. Teachers acted as facilitators, asking open questions and listening carefully. One lab at a high school in California used a project on water conservation. Students chose the exact focus. Some studied local rivers. Others looked at household water use. The teacher asked, "What matters most to you about water?" and then let the students decide how to answer. This method echoed Rogers' belief that learning is most powerful when it is self-directed. Many educators have spoken about how Rogers changed their classrooms. John Noddings, a teacher theorist, said that the teacher who truly listens opens a space where students can become who they are. In practice, this means a teacher might let a class choose a project topic. Imagine a middle school science teacher who asks, "What problem in your community would you like to investigate?" Some students pick recycling, others pick air quality. The teacher then provides resources, but does not dictate the exact steps. The class creates a plan together. This example shows the student-centered idea in action. The teacher's role is to support, not to control. A second everyday example comes from a school counselor who uses active listening. Active listening is a core Rogers skill. The counselor sits with a student who is worried about grades. The counselor repeats back, "You feel pressure because you want to do well for your family." By reflecting the feeling, the counselor shows empathy. The student then feels understood and is more willing to talk about study habits. The counselor can then help the student set personal goals. This approach respects the student's own view of the problem and encourages self-growth. These practices are not just nice ideas. Research shows that when students feel heard, they are more likely to stay in school and to try harder. In one study, a teacher who let students choose reading material saw a 20% increase in reading scores. The teacher reported that the students were more excited to read because they chose books that mattered to them. This result matches Rogers' claim that when a person is accepted without judgment, the person can grow. Critics, however, raise concerns. One common argument is that student-centered methods lower academic standards. Some teachers worry that if students pick topics, they may avoid difficult subjects like algebra or history. They fear that grades will drop and college readiness will suffer. A critic named Dr. Harold Finch wrote that freedom without structure can lead to gaps in basic knowledge. This view suggests that too much choice can leave students without the core skills they need. A second counter-argument focuses on class size. Skeptics argue that genuine empathy is hard to practice in a room of 30 or more students. They say that a teacher cannot listen deeply to each child when the class is large. One education analyst, Ms. Laura Chen, noted that large classes make it impossible for teachers to give each student the personal attention Rogers demanded. This critique points out that without small groups, the teacher may fall back to lecture style, undoing the benefits of student-centered learning. Supporters respond to these objections by pointing to practical solutions. To keep standards high, teachers can set clear learning goals while still allowing choice. For example, a math teacher might require that every project includes the use of algebraic equations, but let students decide what real-world problem to solve. This keeps the essential content while honoring student interest. To address large class sizes, schools can use peer learning groups. In a group of 4, each student can share ideas, and the teacher can rotate among groups, listening closely to each. This structure brings Rogers' empathy into a bigger setting. Modern interpretations of Rogers in education often blend his ideas with technology. Online learning platforms can give each student a personal learning path. A teacher can assign a set of goals. Then let the student choose which video lessons or interactive games to use. The platform records the student's choices and progress, allowing the teacher to give feedback that feels personal. This digital version of unconditional positive regard means the system never judges the student for the path taken, only celebrates progress made. Another modern take is the concept of growth mindset, popularized by psychologist Carol Dweck. While Dweck's work is separate, it echoes Rogers' focus on self-concept. A growth mindset says that abilities can improve with effort. Rogers adds that the feeling of being accepted helps the student believe in that improvement. In a classroom that blends both ideas, a teacher might say, "You tried a new method, and that shows you are growing." The teacher's words give the student both empathy and encouragement. Analogies help to picture how Rogers' ideas work in a classroom. Think of a garden. Traditional teaching often treats the garden like a field where a farmer plants the same crop everywhere. Rogers' approach treats each plant as unique. The teacher waters each plant according to its needs, gives it the right amount of sunlight, and lets it grow in its own shape. If a student needs more time to understand a concept, the teacher provides extra support. If another student moves quickly, the teacher offers richer challenges. The garden thrives because each plant is cared for as an individual. A second analogy compares learning to a river. In a rigid classroom, the river is forced through a narrow channel, moving fast but missing many side streams. In a Rogers-inspired classroom, the river spreads out, finding many small paths that feed into a larger lake of knowledge. The teacher builds gentle banks that guide the water but do not block it. The water can explore, turn, and return with new ideas. This image shows how flexibility and empathy allow learning to flow naturally. Historical anecdotes illustrate how these ideas have been tried before. In 1965, the Summerhill School in England, founded by A.S. Neil, let children decide whether to attend class. Though Neil was not a Rogers follower, the school's practice of respecting each child's choice mirrors Rogers' belief in self-direction. The school's alumni often speak of feeling responsible for their own learning. Another story comes from the 1990s, Collaborative Learning Lab at a university in Boston. Professors there invited high school students to work on interdisciplinary projects. The students chose topics that linked science and art. The professors acted as listeners, asking, "What do you see as the main question?" The projects produced both scientific reports and creative displays, showing that student choice can lead to rich outcomes. Rogers himself wrote about education in his book Freedom to Learn. He said, "The only person who is educated is the one who has learned how to learn." This quote captures the shift from teaching facts to teaching how to think. When a teacher helps a student see how to ask questions, the student gains a tool that lasts a lifetime. The teacher's role becomes one of modeling curiosity and listening. In practice, many teachers have taken Rogers' ideas and blended them with other methods. Maria Montessori, though earlier than Rogers, created classrooms where children choose activities. Modern Montessori schools still use Rogers' language of respect and empathy. In the United States, the Reggio Emilia approach, started after World War I, also values child-led projects and deep listening. Teachers in Reggio Emilia classrooms often write down children's ideas on large paper walls, showing that each voice matters. This visual record is a form of unconditional positive regard. The link between Rogers' self-concept theory and classroom dynamics is clear. When a student feels valued, the student's self-image improves. A stronger self-image leads to more willingness to try new things. This cycle fuels growth. In a classroom that uses Rogers' ideas, a student who once thought, "I am not good at math," may hear a teacher say, "You have shown persistence in solving the problem." The student's self-concept shifts, and the student tries harder. Over time, the student's confidence builds, and the learning deepens. Critics who worry about standards point out that not all subjects lend themselves to free choice. A counterexample is a language learning class that requires a set of vocabulary words. Even here, Rogers' approach can work. The teacher can let students choose how to practice the words through songs, stories, or games. The core content stays the same, but the method varies. This compromise keeps standards while honoring student preference. The argument about large class sizes also meets a practical answer. Many schools now use co-teaching, where two teachers share a large class. One teacher leads a lesson while the other circulates, listening to small groups. This setup allows each teacher to practice active listening with a handful of students at a time. The result is a classroom that feels smaller and more personal, even when the total number of students is high. Technology offers another tool to bring empathy into big classes. Apps that let students submit anonymous reflections give the teacher a window into each student's feelings. The teacher can read a short note like, "I feel nervous about the test," and respond with a supportive message. This digital empathy mirrors Rogers' face-to-face listening, but scales to many students. Modern educators often cite Rogers when describing student-centered learning. Dr. Susan Hart, a principal in Ohio, says, "Our school's mission is to listen to each child's voice and then guide them toward their own goals." She describes a program where each student writes a personal learning plan each semester. The plan includes goals, interests, and a list of resources. Teachers meet with the student monthly to discuss progress. This routine is a direct application of Rogers' idea that the learner should be an active participant. Another modern story comes from a high school counselor named Mr. Alvarez. He uses a technique called reflective listening. When a student talks about stress, Mr. Alvarez repeats, "You feel overwhelmed because you have many activities." He then asks, "What would help you feel more balanced?" The student may suggest a schedule change. By listening and reflecting, the counselor helps the student find a solution that fits their own life. This method respects the student's autonomy, a core Rogers principle. Rogers also believed that learning is most effective when the environment feels safe. In a classroom, safety means that mistakes are not punished, but seen as part of learning. A teacher might say, "When you try a new idea and it does not work," that is, Carl Rogers began his work in the 1940s with a simple idea, that people have an inner drive to grow, and that this drive works best when the listener is warm, honest, and accepting. The idea grew out of Rogers' own experience as a therapist, who noticed that clients often changed when they felt truly heard. He called this approach person-centered therapy. The core principles he set out were empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence. Empathy meant feeling what the other person feels and then reflecting that feeling back. Unconditional positive regard meant accepting the person without judgment. Congruence meant the therapist being real and not hiding behind a professional mask. Rogers wrote, "When I accept myself, I can change," showing how self-acceptance opens the door to growth. Rogers' ideas traveled quickly beyond the private counseling room. In the early 1960s, his book, On Becoming a Person, reached a wide audience of educators, social workers, and health professionals. The book's clear language and human focus made it easy for people in many fields to see how the same principles could help students learn, patients heal, and teams cooperate. One of the first people to carry the torch was Natalie Rogers, Carl's daughter. She expanded the theory into what she called person-centered facilitation. Natalie emphasized that the same caring stance could be used in groups, in schools, and in community projects. She wrote, "The therapist is a guide, not a director," a line that has been quoted in many training manuals for coaches and teachers. The spread of person-centered ideas into counseling, coaching, and healthcare can be seen as a ripple effect. In the 1970s, counseling programs at universities began to require students to practice active listening and to show genuine respect for clients. By the 1980s, a new wave of client-centered groups emerged across the United States. One historical anecdote tells of a community mental health center in Portland that started weekly open-ended groups where participants could share stories without a therapist steering the conversation. The facilitator simply listened, reflected feelings, and offered acceptance. Attendance grew from 10 people to over 100 in 2 years, showing how people were drawn to a space that felt safe and non-judgmental. This growth was recorded in a 1984 report by the American Counseling Association, which noted that client-centered groups reduced dropout rates by 20% compared with more directive group formats. Another historical note comes from hospice care. In the late 1980s, a hospice program in Boston invited Rogers' methods into end-of-life care. Nurses were trained to use empathetic listening when talking with patients about pain, fear, and hope. The program reported that patients who felt truly heard reported lower anxiety and better pain control, even when medication doses stayed the same. A nurse recalled, "When we sat with a patient and simply reflected back his worry, he relaxed enough to take his medicine without resistance." This anecdote illustrates how empathy, a core principle, can affect physical health outcomes. Modern adaptations of Rogers' work have taken many forms. Motivational interviewing, a technique used to help people change addictive behaviors, borrows heavily from the person-centered stance. The practitioner asks open-ended questions, listens without judgment, and reflects the client's own motivations. Acceptance and commitment therapy also builds on Rogers' belief that accepting one's inner experience can free a person to act in line with values. In corporate settings, human-centered design workshops often start with a listening phase that mirrors Rogers' empathetic approach. Even artificial intelligence chatbots are being programmed to show unconditional positive regard, trying to make users feel accepted no matter what they type. Everyday scenarios bring these ideas to life. Imagine a life coach named Maya who meets a client, Alex, who wants to start a small business but feels stuck by fear of failure. Maya does not tell Alex what steps to take. Instead, she asks, "What does starting this business mean to you?" She listens as Alex describes a desire to provide for his family and to feel proud. Maya reflects. "You feel both excitement about helping your family and worry that you might not succeed." By mirroring Alex's feelings, Maya helps him see his own values clearly. Alex then sets a realistic goal of launching a pilot product within 3 months, feeling confident because his coach has validated his inner drive. The coach's role mirrors Rogers' idea of the therapist as a facilitator, not a director. In a medical office, Dr. Patel sees a patient, Mrs. Liu, who has been prescribed a new medication for hypertension but has missed several doses. Rather than reprimanding her, Dr. Patel sits down, looks her in the eye, and says, "I hear that taking this medicine feels like a burden for you." He then asks, "What worries you about the medication?" Mrs. Liu explains that she fears side effects and feels the pills remind her of aging. Dr. Patel reflects back, You feel that the pills make you think about getting older, and that worries you. By showing empathy, Dr. Patel reduces the patient's resistance. Mrs. Liu agrees to try a lower dose and to keep a diary of how she feels. Over the next weeks, her blood pressure improves, and she reports feeling more in control. This example shows how empathetic listening can improve patient compliance, echoing Rogers' belief that understanding a person's inner world can change behavior. These stories are not isolated. Surveys of counseling centers that adopted person-centered training show higher client satisfaction scores. A 2019 study in the Journal of Clinical Psychology found that therapists who scored high on empathy measures helped clients achieve goals faster than those who used a more neutral style. The data supports the claim that empathy is not just a nice feeling, but a practical tool for change. However, not everyone agrees that therapist neutrality is less effective. Some critics argue that a neutral stance, where the therapist remains detached and does not reveal personal feelings, allows clients to project their own thoughts without influence. This view stems from classic psychoanalytic practice, where the therapist's neutrality was seen as a blank screen onto which the client's unconscious could be projected. Well-known critic, Dr. Harold Green, wrote in a 1992 article, "When the therapist stays neutral, the client's own voice emerges more clearly, uncolored by the therapist's values." Proponents of neutrality claim that too much empathy can lead the therapist to become overly involved, potentially blurring boundaries and reducing objectivity. They point to studies where highly directive approaches, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, produced faster symptom reduction for certain anxiety disorders. The debate remains active, and many training programs now teach a balance. Use empathy to build trust, then apply specific techniques when needed. A second counter-argument focuses on the commercial misuse of Rogers' ideas. As the self-help market exploded in the 1990s and 2000s, many books and seminars promised instant transformation using a watered-down version of person-centered therapy. Critics say that these products often reduce deep listening to a checklist of phrases, stripping away the genuine caring that makes the method work. Dr. Elaine Chung, a professor of ethics in psychology, warned in a 2008 editorial, "When empathy is packaged as a sales pitch, it loses its authenticity and can become manipulative." She noted cases where corporate trainers taught managers to say, "I understand how you feel," without truly listening, leading employees to feel insulted rather than supported. The concern is that the core principle of unconditional positive regard becomes a tool for persuasion rather than a path to personal growth. Despite these criticisms, many modern practitioners have found ways to keep Rogers' spirit alive while adapting to new contexts. In coaching, the International Coach Federation, ICF, includes active listening and creating a supportive environment as core competencies, directly echoing Rogers' language. In healthcare, the Institute for Patient-Centered Outcomes Research promotes shared decision-making, a process where doctors and patients discuss options openly, respecting the patient's values. Again, a modern echo of unconditional positive regard. Analogies help to illustrate why empathy works. Think of a garden. A plant needs sunlight, water, and the right soil to grow. If a gardener simply waters the plant without checking whether the soil is too dry or the light is too harsh, the plant may still survive, but will not thrive. When the gardener feels the soil's texture, observes the plant's leaves, and adjusts care accordingly, the plant blossoms. In the same way, a therapist who feels the client's emotional soil and adjusts responses can help the client grow more fully. Another analogy compares the therapeutic relationship to a mirror. When a person looks into a clean mirror, they see themselves clearly. If the mirror is smudged, the image is distorted. Empathy works like cleaning the mirror. It lets the person see their own thoughts and feelings without distortion. Rogers' influence also appears in education. Teachers who practice person-centered listening notice that students become more engaged. A teacher in a middle school in Ohio began each class with a 2-minute check-in where students could share how they felt that morning. The teacher simply listened and reflected back, without trying to solve problems. Over the semester, attendance rose and students reported feeling more respected. This small change mirrors Rogers' belief that feeling understood can motivate people to take responsibility for their own learning. The spread of person-centered ideas into coaching, counseling, and healthcare also led to new research tools. The empathy scale, developed by researchers in the 1990s, measures how well a therapist can understand a client's inner experience. Studies using the scale have shown that higher empathy scores correlate with better treatment outcomes across many disorders, from depression to chronic pain. These findings give empirical support to the claim that Rogers' core principles are not just feel-good ideas, but measurable factors in healing. Rogers' legacy is also visible in how modern therapy talks about the therapeutic alliance, the partnership between therapist and client. The alliance is often described as the single most important predictor of success in therapy. This concept directly descends from Rogers' focus on a genuine, trusting relationship. When a therapist is congruent, showing real feelings rather than a professional facade, the client feels safe to explore difficult topics. The therapist's authenticity acts like a bridge, allowing the client to cross from fear to curiosity. In hospice care today, the person-centered approach has become standard practice in many countries. Nurses receive training in presence, a skill that asks them to be fully with the patient, listening to fears about death, and reflecting those feelings back. One hospice nurse, Maria Torres, recalls a night when a patient, Mr. Alvarez, expressed anger at his family for not visiting. Maria listened, said, "You feel hurt that they are not here, and that makes you angry," and then stayed silent. Stayed silent. Alvarez later said he felt heard for the first time in weeks, and his pain medication needs dropped. This story illustrates how Rogers' empathy can ease both emotional and physical suffering. Natalie Rogers took the person-centered model further by introducing the concept of self-exploratory learning. She argued that people learn best when they are allowed to discover solutions on their own, rather than being told what to do. In a corporate training program, a facilitator asked participants to share a recent work challenge, then guided the group to ask each other probing questions. The participants reported that they felt more ownership of the solutions that emerged. Natalie's work shows how the same caring stance can be used to spark creativity and problem-solving in groups. Modern technology also tries to capture the essence of Rogers' empathy. Some telehealth platforms now include virtual rooms where therapists can share a calming background and use soft lighting, aiming to create a sense of safety, even through a screen. Researchers at a university tested whether patients felt more understood in these virtual rooms compared with plain video calls. The results showed higher satisfaction scores, suggesting that the environment can support the therapist's empathetic stance. Critics of the commercial spread of Rogers' ideas point out that some online self-help courses charge high fees for personal growth programs that simply teach people to repeat phrases like, "I accept you." They argue that without a trained professional to model genuine empathy, these programs may create a false sense of progress. Dr. Tin Chung's editorial highlighted a case where a client bought a